Director Spotlight, Osgood Perkins. Osgood Perkins is an American actor, screenwriter, and director, and he is also the son of Anthony Perkins, who was the star of the movie Psycho. He's played in movies such as Legally Blonde, Not Another Teen Movie, and more, but in the last few years he has co-written, written, and directed full-length movies. On his mother's side, he is the great-grandson of Elsa Schiaparelli, a famous Italian fashion designer, heavily influenced by surrealism. Long story short, there are a lot of influential and creative people in his family lineage. Astronomers, photographers, fashion designers, actors, musicians, models, a Neapolitan aristocrat, and an Egyptologist. In this spotlight, I'll look into his 3 films that he wrote or co-wrote and directed and see what things all tie his movies together, such as his atmospherically unique style, his restraint in the unknown, and telling sad stories of vulnerability with horror as a catalyst to tell them. The Blackcoat's Daughter is a 2015 psychological horror movie. It premiered at the 2015 Toronto International Film Festival, and then it was released in the US in 2017. It stars 2 actresses that I really like already, Emma Roberts, a known scream queen, and Kiernan Shipka, star of The Chilling Tales of Sabrina. Fun fact, his brother did the score for the movie. He said he had a hard time finding producers because they liked the screenplay a lot, but they said it was a movie that would never be made because it was so different. Basically, the movie is about a troubled young woman going on a journey on her way to a prep school where 2 stranded students are already facing a threat from unknown evil forces. The movie definitely has a sleepiness to it for about the first 30 minutes at least, but I'm still interested in trying to put together the pieces and interested in the stories of the girls. I would say this movie ranks second in his films as far as my likability of it. I thought it would be the ideas of the possibly satanic nuns that would be the creep factor in the movie, but it's actually the girls themselves. There's just a sadness and a darkness to all of them. There's not an overabundance of special effects or jump scares in this movie. If anything, it's the atmosphere which creates the tension and the increasing terror of what is to possibly come for the girls and those around them, while also exploring a creative way to tell a possible subtle satanic thread of a movie. It was beautifully shot in Canada in the dead of winter and definitely A24 worthy. There are borrowed ideas from the masters for sure that we see in the movie, and all of the girls did a great job with their individual characters. I appreciate that everything is not blatantly told to us in the movie. There are things you have to put together, and that he allowed the audience to be smart enough to put it together, because at first I was a little unsure, but it comes together well, unlike some other movies that have a non-linear timeline and you just get a little confused. He is definitely a master of holding back as far as the horror elements of the movie. He definitely used restraint, and he said as far as some of the brutal scenes in comparison to other horror movies, if everything is brutal, then the scene that is supposed to be the most brutal or most important doesn't seem brutal at all. In the end, it is definitely a sad movie about grief and loss disguised as a horror movie. It's a humanistic film that does not behave as a horror movie, and I definitely agree. It is beautifully shot. There are a few elements that he was looking into when making this movie as far as the look of it and the feel of it. He, I would say, uses these elements in all of his movies. But the 2 that stand out for me in this movie, I would say, are some of the glamour and the beauty. His next movie, which technically came out before The Blackcoat's Daughter, but it was filmed after it, is I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. It is known as a gothic supernatural horror movie. It premiered at the 2016 Toronto International Film Festival and was later released on Netflix. It's supposed to sort of play a tribute or take inspiration from writer Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Witch and The Haunting of Hill House, and it is also based off of an old folk song called Pretty Polly. The basic plot of the movie is there is a nurse who comes to live with a tired elderly woman with dementia who so happens to be a horror novel writer, and she comes to believe that the house is haunted. The movie starts off with creepy monologue with this sort of distorted voice that we also get in The Blackcoat's Daughter. The first scare of the movie did get me, even though I saw it coming, and it's possibly one of my favorite scenes from the entire movie. Things about this movie are subtle, unsettling. Things like the music and the voice was possibly the most creepy elements in the entire movie, not any of the scary moments, because it's not a very scary movie. Then there are the subtly creepy, the subtly nasty things like turning of molded pages that really just give us that more gothic vibe. And again, there aren't any really jump scares, and the movie reads to me like a really long poem. Personally, for me, it was a little bit of a super slow burn. It crawled. There's no huge climax or payoff for the crawl. It's like a long dream sequence, or like I said, a long poem. And I get that it reads sort of like a novel. Last but not least, we have Gretel and Hansel 2020, inspired by the brothers Grimm, Hansel and Gretel. It stays pretty close to the original story that the Grimm brothers learned from in the 1800s, but the story may have originated even as far back as the 1300s, spawned from the Great Famine. Perkins stays pretty true to the source material though, but not in the way of the pebbles or the breadcrumbs or the house being made out of candy and gingerbread. But I see why they did not include that detail. It would have had a very different tone and feel, possibly more childish or cartoony. There are fantastical elements to the film, but the elements that they take more of a realistic dark fantasy route. The movie was shot with an 18mm lens, wide angle, again borrowed from the masters, a 1:55 to 1 square ratio, so it's more like old school TV. And he said one of the reasons they chose to do this is so that the movie looks like a storybook and you're drawn in, feeling closer to the characters versus being disconnected with super wide angle and the characters looking very small. He also saw it as an opportunity for kids because it's PG-13, even though it definitely pushes those limits in my opinion, for kids to see something different for a horror movie, or not being able to perhaps guess everything about the way in which the movie will unfold. It was a relatively low-budget movie and his first theatrical premiere. The budget was $5 million and it took 25 days to make. The acting was very good in the movie for the most part. We have Sophia Lillis, who is one of the stars of It. And with the slight change of the movie, we see that the movie is based around her. Also, the woman that played the witch, Alice Krige, she did an exceptional job. In the story, Gretel and the witch have a pretty endearing relationship at the start as the witch begins to teach her life lessons and seems to have truly taken the children in. But of course, the small things start not adding up, and the girl grows wiser as to how to deal with something that is seemingly sinister as she begins to have these nightmares and possible visions. It is not a super fast-paced movie, but I did enjoy the pacing of the movie. It wasn't a slow burn. I enjoyed the children's adventure to get to the witch's house. Like in his other movies, we get a lot of atmosphere. The cinematography is gorgeous. The world building with it, we understand sort of the day-to-day to understand the choices later made in the movie. It's not something perhaps that the casual horror movie fan will love. It's not a super frightening movie. It's not filled with jump scares. But I think people that enjoy cinema will still take to this because it's not too scary. And it has a slight art house vibe, which is up my alley. Yeah, it's fantasy, but without a lot of bells and whistles. There's some very, very creepy moments, creepy facets without extreme special effects or jump scares. I can see how they were trying to use the budget as wisely as possible in the places where they did do some special effects. And these are definitely some things I've come to appreciate about his storytelling in general. One thing that was kind of weird, the three main actors of the movie had slightly different accents, and that only threw me off for continuity. The witch sounded Irish-ish, which now I know she's South African. The boy sounded a little more British, and the girl sounded very American. There were a few details that were not super ironed out, but a friend and I talked it over, and we think we understood everything in the movie for the most part. Again, maybe the ending could have been a little more dramatic, but it was actually fine for me. It was a good payoff. It took things that we saw them setting up and they followed through on earlier in the movie. Overall, this is definitely my favorite movie thus far from Osgood Perkins. As far as some of the themes that we see in his movies that he said he likes to put into them, I definitely get the texture, the color, and the beauty with this movie. So again, Osgood Perkins, I'm very excited for his future, having 3 solid movies under his belt as far as being heavily the one to make them happen. Hearing him talk about film and just his very low-key nature, but still has a good sense of humor of wanting to get things done, wanting them to be well done, sort of not liking what he's working on and then changing his mind. Just the whole artistic process, along with him using the silence, the glamour, the texture, the color, the look, the beauty, the frailty, and just taking all of these sad or disheartening stories and making them into special horror movies is definitely something to be appreciated.